welcome, and thank you all for coming to tonight's Communities Read event, an author talk with Annie Hartnett. I'm Lee Smith, the Adult Services Librarian at Mount Pleasant Library. I'm joined by Amy Rosa of Washington Park Library and Denise Brophy of Wanskuck Library. Before I turn it over to Denise, I have a couple quick housekeeping items. We have closed captioning enabled, so if you'd like to show or hide closed captioning, you can click on live transcript on the bottom toolbar. You're also encouraged to participate in the discussion that we'll be having a little later. So really, feel free to type questions or comments in the chat at any time during the talk. And Denise and I will invite you to unmute and join the discussion when that part begins. So Denise, what is happening at Wanskuck Library?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me host this evening, and so glad to see some familiar faces and names up on the board. So what is happening at Wanskuck Library? Quite a few things. We're getting things back in order. Folks are coming in again. It's very exciting to be post-COVID finally. And one of the big events that we have going on is our community potluck and cultural celebration, which was coming up on December 10th. It's a collaboration that we have with the University of Rhode Island Cooperative Extension. The date is December 8th, and we are encouraging folks to register through Eventbrite. You can bring in a dish that is meaningful to you, to your family. If you'd like to bring in the recipe, that'd be great too. The premise is share a dish, share a story. And yeah, that's going to be great. If you need any further information about that, kindly just give me a buzz at the library. Also, we are going to be discussing the book that we were discussing this evening. So Unlikely Animals will be spoken about again on the last Monday of November during our brown bag book discussion, which is from 11:30 until 12:30. There's so many themes to talk about, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Let's do it again. Yes. And what else is happening? We're having an ugly art contest for any kids that would like to stop by and pick up bags of unusual items. And then the kids vote to see what is the ugliest, what's the most creative. On Monday, we have a youth and family yoga program, which is usually very well attended. Tuesday, we've got a mentoring program, which takes place with tweens. And Friday, we have sewing, open maker space. We have a couple of very experienced sewers in the community, and youth and adults, though it did start with just adults, but we have got some pretty serious teens as well. So that's going on each Friday from 3 until 5. So with that, I would like to turn the mic over to Annie Hartnett. That way we can get into our storytelling, the various themes, how you came to write this story, what your motivation was. I understand it's like very well researched. Actually, I read the book twice. It was really lovely.
Oh,
so
thanks.
yeah, lots to talk about. So the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Denise. Thank you so
Welcome.
much. Thanks everyone for having me. Thanks, Lee. And I don't know if everyone in this room has read the book. I will try not to do any spoilers, but we will talk about a lot of things. It is the type of book that even if you haven't read it, I don't think a conversation could ruin it, because there is so many things going on in this book, which is is the pleasure of it, and also maybe some of the pains of how it was to write. But it's so the book, Unlikely Animals, is my second book. My first one was called Rabbit Cake, that came out in 2017. And I know there's probably writers in this room, and the second book is famously, so some people may have heard that the second book is like famously hard to write, harder to write than the first, in some ways, and that is how I found it. Because please excuse my many Paw Patrol tattoos. They I don't want you to wonder what they are. They're Paw Patrol tattoos, all the characters of Paw Patrol. And so anyway, so Rabbit Cake came out in 2017. I went into sort of everything happened that Rabbit Cake, like, I was lucky as lucky as a first-time author can be. It was well reviewed. It was like people were really nice who read it. But it still like tripped me up in writing again, because it you have to like recalibrate your relationship to writing. What is a very personal relationship to, before I was writing just for myself, and I did go to an MFA program for my classmates, but I was mostly just writing for myself, not thinking about publishing. And then when I was lucky enough to get it published, that it just changed. It's from a private relationship to a public relationship. So that was one thing I had problems with, because I wanted to make the readers of Rabbit Cake happy again. Maybe the people that had not liked Rabbit Cake, I wanted to prove them wrong, all those things that just, so I started to write Unlikely Animals, and I was kind of slogging through it. And I had a friend who is now an accountability partner, and she and I like kept each other on track so that we were at least writing. My original idea for the book was to write about a young woman who was returning home to take care of her dying father. And I love the book Animal Dreams. So I was sort of inspired by Barbara Kingsolver's Animal Dreams, except I always wish with that book, the title is like, I was disappointed from the title to the actual book. Not, the book is wonderful, and I'm sure a lot of people love that book, but I was like, there should be really more animals in this book that's called Animal Dreams. So I wanted to write kind of Animal Dreams that was a woman returning home to take care of her father, who is suffering from a brain disease. That was kind of the same premise that her father has in that book. But I wanted some magic, and I wanted more animals. So that was my kind of initial seed of an idea, like Animal Dreams, but with a little bit of magic, or magic realism. Really, it's not total magic. Magic realism and animals. So that was where I began. And then one thing that helps me when I'm searching for ideas is just to read a ton of other people's stuff. And so I'm always kind of embarrassed to admit this, but I had been told by people after Rabbit Cake came out that I wrote something like John Irving. And at the time I had not read any John Irving. I kind of had just missed, we all have gaps, right? I had missed John Irving. And so I picked up Garp I began with, and then I was like, oh my gosh, I love this. So this is exactly the type of book I like to read. I didn't quite agree that I could see that we have the same sort of mordant sense of humor, but I did think that his books were much more complicated than my first book had been. So that appealed to me. And then I also read, I went sort of down he's written like 20 novels. So I have not read all of them, but I read all the, I've read Owen Meany and Cider House Rules and Hotel New Hampshire, and then a couple of the minor ones. But so that inspired me to write something that I wanted to write something bigger that was really more complicated. And what I love so much about that book is that there's all this kind of disparate stuff that comes together in the end. So that was one goal. But I didn't know how I was going to make it bigger. And so this is where the luck part comes in the making of this book. So initial idea, magic hands, which the woman has magic hands and she's come home to heal her father, or try to heal her father, or not know she can't heal her father of this brain disease. And so that was like a crazy premise to start out with, but that's where I started. And then I was up visiting friends in New Hampshire. So I'm writing this magic realism story that's set in, I never exactly, in the end, I picked 2014. So it's set in 2014. I liked my characters to have cell phones. I like them to, tell jokes that I would tell. So I, so far, have always set my books, setting wise, in like around like when I, exist now. So, so it was set in 2014. And then I was visiting friends in Newport, New Hampshire, which is near Sunapee. And I was still in this place where I was not really happy with my writing. I was really depressed for other reasons. Basically my beloved dog had died. So I was in like a bad place personally, besides the writing. So this just turned out to be a gift that I look up. I'm visiting friends in Newport, New Hampshire, and I'm going to share my screen to show you what I see. So I look up, we're driving along, and let's see, share screen. I'm going to show you my whole desktop, which is a mess, but hopefully you won't be able to see how messy it is. I'll just show you the pictures. So we're up in Newport, New Hampshire, which is like a small town that is not a town where there are no other mansions. So I see this mansion up on this hill, and this the picture with the driveway, or the better picture, that one's pretty, the one that's not the bird's eye view. I took this one with the driveway. So that's what I see. I look up and I see this huge mansion, and then there's the aerial view that you can see like more how impressive this mansion is. In the middle of like nowhere, New Hampshire. And I am so like, what is that place? It looks like a hotel. I want to go there. It's a spa, like, or, I just really, or is it historic? What? And at the base of the driveway, that's not in the picture, you can see it's no trespassing signs. So you can't see that in the picture. But, and so I'm like, this is private property. And at that point, I really need to know more about this place. My friends who had just moved to Newport did not know what it was. And so we went back to their house and I started Googling like huge yellow mansion, Newport, New Hampshire. And that's where I came across Austin Corbin, who is was a robber baron, and he moved up to he moved up to Newport, New Hampshire after he had made his millions in sort of like in railroads and banking and coal, all these different ways. And he moved up there to the house that he had been born in. And then legend has it that he moved up to the house that he had been born in, and knocked down that house and built this mansion around one room, the room that he had been born in. So he left one room of the original house, which I just thought was so weird and creepy. And so that's the first thing I read. So I like things that are a little weird. So I'm instantly interested, but then I keep diving on the internet, and I find out that not only did he build this mansion, but that he bought 26,000 acres. Which was, depending on, there's different reports, but whether it's 30 farms or 60 farms, between 30 and 60 farms, and bought this land and fenced in 26,000 acres and built an exotic animal park and shipped in animals from all over the world. And originally it wasn't supposed to be a hunting park. It was originally just supposed to be an exotic animal park. And he wanted all the animals in the world to come live harmoniously in, New Hampshire. but then the white-tailed deer exploded because white-tailed deer love New England. At the time, white-tailed deer had been hunted out in New Hampshire. So which is so funny. I live in Massachusetts and there are like 3 white-tailed deer in my yard every morning. It's just like they're always there. And so they exploded and then hunting began in the park. And then I find out, and so I'm so fascinated, I'm obsessed. No one else in the house, that no one else who was staying with us was like, I just couldn't get enough of this. And it just, I don't know, it set me on fire. But I didn't know if I was going to write about it because, like I said, I don't write historical fiction. It's not something I've ever tried or think that I would necessarily be good at writing because of sort of my writing style. And it wasn't something I would want to try, at least not right now. And so I didn't know what I was going to do with it other than I wanted to know more. And then I find out that the park is still there today. It is still intact. It is now owned by 25 anonymous millionaires who each have like a parcel of the land. And it's totally secret. There's a NPR episode, New Hampshire NPR, look up the Millionaires Hunt Club. This was in my author's notes, so some people have probably listened to this. It's super fascinating. And you can just hear about like how hard it is to get into the park now. Most people that I know in this town, it's so huge, it spans 5 towns. So most people that I know in Newport have not been inside the park. And people just say like, it's a black hole in my backyard. You know, I can see the fence through the woods. I can hear the elk in there sometimes, but I have not been in there. And so that just really like captured my imagination. And then I started going to the Historical Society in town and found out that, then I'll stop sharing my screen. Then I see, as I'm cruising through, like, you know, they have just binders of stuff up there in the attic. And I find this man, Ernest Harold Baynes. And Ernest Harold Baynes was a naturalist in the park from, sorry, my dog is scratching at the door. Hold on 1 second. I told Willie, if you come in, you have to stay in, but he doesn't always listen to me. So I'm in the attic of the Historical Society and I see this picture, and then I start reading about this man, Ernest Harold Baynes, who was a naturalist in the park, or at the edge of the park. He was hired by not the first Austin Corbett, not the one who built the mansion, because he died. And then his son took over, and his son would later lose the fortune. But so the son, which isn't really important, except that Austin Corbett the first was like a really bad guy. So in some ways I didn't want to write a book about him at all. So I find Ernest Harold Baynes, and he was a Dr. Dolittle with animals that lived in his house. And if you've read the book, you know this, but so he lived at the edge of the park from 1904 till 1925. And this is his tame fox, the Sprite, who's important in the book. This is also a picture I couldn't put in the book, so I included it here, where you can kind of see how handsome he is. I kind of wish I had put this one in the book, because this was important in terms of, you know, things that set my imagination on fire, because I love animals. If anyone has ever like met me or has read my first book knows I love animals. So I was really interested by a guy who was a real life Dr. Dolittle, who would always get in trouble in boarding school for having a hedgehog in his pocket. He was just born with this sort of natural ability to almost communicate with animals. And he married his high school sweetheart. They had a really like suspiciously long engagement, which I sort of wonder about. But anyway, he and they both lived, he and his wife lived at the edge of the park and had a bear, they had wolves, they had deer, they had foxes, more than just the Sprite, but the Sprite was his favorite. And they had like birds, and they had 2 tame bison. Bison were, Austin Corbett had the largest private herd of bison. So I'm finding all this stuff out, and then I'm poking around town. And then I think the last thing that sealed the deal for me in terms of what I had to write about him was that I was in the library and I was asking the librarian, I'd kind of not worn out my welcome maybe, but I had asked all the historical societies, as much as I could. And then the librarian was also a historian, and I asked her, and she said, oh, I think, I might have a picture of Ernest Harold Baynes somewhere. His wife is a photographer, so there's tons and tons of pictures of him. Most of them are actually north of Newport in another town, because he lived, for my purposes, I put them all in one town, but for my purposes, the mansion, since it spans 5 towns, he actually lived in a village called Meriden, up near Plainfield, closer to Dartmouth. And anyway, so he's handsome, and I'm in the library, and I say to the librarian, Ernest Harold Baynes, and then someone else who's sitting in the library, just this old man, said, Ernest Harold Baynes, well, he was quite the womanizer. And I just was like, this man died in 1925, and this was 2018. It's just so funny that I could mention him, and just someone in the library just like pipes up with this like old gossip. And I just love that, because it was just like such a small town thing to happen. And it also really started making him more of a character to me, that I could make, like, he started actually, thinking, okay, I really want to write about this person. And I think that that's probably why people, I haven't done it, but like once, why people would like to write historical fiction, something that humanizes like the historical figures. And so him being a womanizer, and so then I started asking people about that, and it was confirmed by other historians, and apparently he used to, he would travel not only the US, but he would travel the US and the world, and one way that he would get money for his efforts to protect wildlife was just to have affairs with rich ladies who would write him checks. And I just loved that so much. I don't know what his I think on the one hand, his wife he's traveling the world, and his wife is alone in the cottage, or with their maid. They had a maid, with a house full of wild beasts. And so I just also found comedy in that, because they didn't have kids, but it's kind of this sort of that she has to hold down the household with a bear and wolves and I have a toddler. So it just there was a lot that was that I wanted to write about. So Ernest Harold Baynes became a ghost in the book, and I already had written that. So Emma comes home, and she's I'm going to stop screen sharing because you can kind of see all the clutter that I have on my desktop. So Ernest Harold Baynes became a ghost for me, and that kind of worked already with what I had set up. This was so much of this book was the universe like nudging me in the right direction, which was kind of funny. So I had already given him a brain disease because I was inspired by Barbara Kingsolver, and I had already decided, even though it doesn't say this in the book, and I don't really want to commit to it, but it's pretty similar, if not exactly, Lewy body disease, which does cause often hallucinations of animals. And so there was already the hallucinations of animals that started, and then I added like Ernest Harold Baynes becomes a ghost that's visiting the man with the brain disease. And that kind of, even though it was like, okay, this is probably too much, and that's a question I'm always asking myself. And I am sort of I had my first editor, my Tin House editor, someone asked her in an interview, like, how do you get more out of Annie when she's writing? And she was like, I never have to get more out of her. I have to get less out of her. Which I think is, that's a strength and a weakness for me, is that I like to give you more. And this book, there's definitely, I lean towards the more. And so, but I was cautious about, is it too much to have a man who is both experiencing So he sees like rabbits in the house. He sees cats in the house. He gets kicked out of, he's forced into retirement for seeing cats in the classroom. And because he teaches at a local college, and he can't, it's like chaotic for him to be teaching and also asking the students who brought the cats in here. So I tried the ghost, and it just kind of worked because Ernest Harold Baynes also had animals living in his house. And so it just kind of like started to gel in a way that made sense to me. But the final thing, and then I think I can just, if people want to start thinking about what questions they want to ask me, if that's, or Lee, I know I have some questions, but so the last part that that people always ask me, and is also one of the last things of like the universe nudging me and making this book make sense, was that, so I wrote this book, I wanted to write it like John Irving, and I wanted to have like this third person omniscient, because that's how he writes. I mean, that's how he writes Garp, and I really love Garp. And so that was how I tried it at first. And that did allow me to do a lot of freedom, a lot more freedom than I had with the first person that I had done in my first book. And I also knew that I had to get away from first person for my second book, because I didn't want to write, like, her voice in the first book was so strong in my head that I don't think I could have written another first person character. I probably just would have ended up writing the same character again. So I needed to change point of views. So I did third person omniscient, and there's a writer, Lucas Mann, who lives in Providence. Some people probably know him. He's wonderful. And he read part of it and he said, Annie, this is like funny and good, but like, who's talking? Someone, it's a third person omniscient, and the people, and they don't usually tell jokes, and this narrator is telling jokes. And so I was like, I don't care, Lucas, like, I have to get the plot out. So I wrote all the plot, told Lucas that I didn't care who was talking. But then I realized I did have to, once I was done with my first draft, I had to figure out who was narrating. And since it was omniscient, I was limited, because I couldn't have it just be, a close third of the main character, Emma, the one who comes home. Because I would lose so much of the other stuff about that. This is really a book about place, and a book about everyone in the town. It's not just about this one character, or even just about this one family, although it's focused on the one family. So I didn't know what I was going to do. And then I'm at MacDowell Colony, which is an artist colony that it's so cushy. They select people, and so I had applied, and you get to go up there. You have your own cabin, and they bring you lunch every day, and then all the artists have dinner every night. And I'd never been to something that was that fancy, and that felt like part of history, because there's just so much work that has been created there, both literature and composing. And so I was kind of like, why would they pick me? Someone got drunk and put me in the wrong pile, so I am trying to make the most of my time there. I was also 5 months pregnant at the time, so it was like the clock was ticking. I had to really work hard on this book, because I felt like once my kid comes, my creative life is over, which is not the case. But so that anyway, I had a month there, and on my third day there, I realized that that Thornton Wilder wrote Our Town at MacDowell, and that the Our Town cemetery is right down the street. And so I was like, oh, it could be told from the ghost in the cemetery. So I already had Ernest Harold Baynes as the ghost, so he already existed in the book. And so I added more ghosts, and so they narrate the book from and Ernest Harold Baynes really was cremated, which really worked in terms of the rules of the graveyard. The rules are really important if you've read the book, that the people in the graveyard have to stay in the graveyard. They can't meddle with the town, and they can't, give any of the answers. And then Ernest Harold Baynes has more freedom because he's cremated. And so that, and so I was scared to do it because at the time, Lincoln in the Bardo by George Saunders had come out the year before. And so I didn't want people to think I was like a poor man's George Saunders, but I tried it and I showed it to a friend. He was like, this is your own thing and you're working in a long tradition, like, Spoon River. And I did think, because I had already written the plot, it was, the Greek chorus really helped me, because I was asking a lot of a reader to be obsessed with the things that I was obsessed with, which was the town in 2014, which is a town that is like, it's my favorite place. Spent a lot of time there, and it has like some small town problems. There is the opioid crisis, but it also is like idyllic in some ways, in many ways. It's like a quaint New England town, which I just love. It has like a Stars Hollow vibe. And then also, but how do I connect that to my obsession with Ernest Harold Baynes in this park, or the original creation of this park, which, the park was created in 1886, and then Ernest Harold Baynes 1904 to 1925. It's just like a stretch. So then I realized the people in the cemetery would care about this, because history is happening for them all the time. So they would care about the history, and they would care about the town now, in terms of, because they love the living people so much, and they watch us like we're on television. And so that really made the whole book click together for me. And I think the ghosts are the reason that I'm able to get away with having like so much packed into this book. So that's the history of how the book came to be. Lee, did you want to ask me questions, or do you want me to go to the chat?
Well, actually,
so Denise. Yeah,
I'm
Denise.
sorry. I was just going to say, perhaps Janet Coretti, you can unmute yourself. That way you can ask your question.
Oh, I can read it also. That's easier.
Yep.
So Janet asks, do you know someone who is a healer yourself? Why is it important for her to have that power instead of just being a caring daughter? So yes, so she in the book, she's born with a slight magic healing power. She is the nurse picks her up and says like, oh, this baby cured my sciatica. And so it's and then they do these experiments of how magic is she. I really wanted to play with sort of, I like to use magical realism to say things about the way I feel. And I think that one way that I feel, and especially felt in my 20s, I'm no longer in my 20s, but when I was in my 20s, I felt this tension of, I'm an adult now, and shouldn't I be more powerful? And the novel really is the main theme of the novel. It's all about caretaking. So she comes home and she has actually lost this healing power. That is not too much of a spoiler, because it happens pretty quickly that you find out that she has been born with this healing power. It was a big part of her like being a mythical figure in this town, and she's come home without it. And just as her father is sick, and her mother wants her to or everyone wants her to try to heal her father, even though that would be more power than she ever had. So she has this knowledge that even if she ever had that power, she wouldn't have been able to heal someone of a brain disease, but she wants to, but also she knows she doesn't have it anymore. And so she has to come home, and she has to kind of fall from the expectations that were always on her, that she was this golden girl, that she was headed for great things. And so for me, it's that feeling of knowing that, so my father had a heart attack in 2017, right when I sort of was starting to cook up this book, like the very beginnings of it. And I just, that feeling of he's not going to be around forever, and there's nothing I can do about it, no matter how powerful I get as an adult. And having the magic in it allows me to like both be more playful with that, and also just bring up some sort of some themes that like the caretaking of Clive Starling is an impossible one, because he's such a difficult person. I mean, he's my favorite character. He's a wonderful person, but he's also difficult. And then the caretaking of the adult child, or the adult children, is a big theme. Augie has been struggling with a drug problem for the past several years, and the parents have been trying to get him help, but also they've, been really, there's only so much we can make any adult do. I mean, there's only so much I can make my 3-year-old do. So, so those were the sort of some of like the caretaking of adult children, the caretaking of children taking care of adults. And it's I think some of it is, could I have written this book without any magic? Probably, but it's I think I get to have a lot more fun if there's a slight bit of magic. And I do like playing with, I consider myself a collector of, can you believe this really happened? So she asked me if I really know a healer, and I really like that it's not just that I made up this magic thing. It's charismata iomaton, as I said in the, as it's called in the book, is a real like term. It is people who, so I really wanted to play with that, that is like a last desperate thing that people often do, is, get on a plane and go to some like Argentina or someplace and visit a healer as their last ditch effort. So, so yeah, that was a choice that then also I wanted, what happens at the end allows for, like, they're hoping for a miracle, right? That's the town. And then how do I deliver a miracle in the end was kind of my question of, how am I going to do that in a way that's unexpected?
Annie, I had wanted to add that the characters are very colorful throughout the story. I mean, no doubt about it. And reminds me of a few people, we each may know that will come to our homes for the holidays. I was wondering, how did you manage to maintain a folksy feel between each of the characters when, again, they were so colorful, and that they could have been obstinate, they could have lacked compassion, and you seem to develop the characters and let them live within the story.
Yeah, I think that I do love to create characters. I didn't have this with my first book. I loved having this large cast of characters where I could create some of the ghosts give me a lot of freedom once the narrators get, because they love the people of this town so much, and they also know they're omniscient. They know everything about everyone in this town, and they love everyone no matter sort of what everyone's path is. And so writing from that place where I know everything about you and I also love you is an amazing place to write from, because you can write, always loved writing about siblings, because you can be really mean to each other, but there's always love, or not, maybe there's not always love there, but for me, I love my brothers, and there's probably no one I'm meaner to. And so writing from that place has always been fun for me, because you can say things that, like, dialogue can be really fun. And I love that tension of just like being really cutting, but loving. And so this gave me some of that ability to do with a whole town. Is I'm going to show you all these people's flaws, but I'm going to love them when I do it, because the ghosts love these people and they really want the best for everybody. And that just gave me a huge amount of freedom to write about a lot of different problems that people in the town have. And I think that does give it the folksy feel. And that also prevents me from ever being mean. One thing my editor had said, my Rabbit Cake editor had said to me was that what she liked best about my humor is that I never got mean. And that was not something I was aware of when she said it to me after I had already written Rabbit Cake, but then that became sort of a guiding light while I was editing, as I always try to edit it out if I get mean. And then I can start drafts with something that I think is like a little bit too mean. Like even I do something that's, I'll put like ex-boyfriends' names, if there's a character that's not supposed to be like the best character, then sometimes I'll put an ex-boyfriend's name in there, and I'll always change it, or my husband's ex-girlfriend's name, so, and I'll always change that because it feels just too mean, and then that like evolves. So the meanness evolves out of the book. But yeah, I think the ghost narrators really allow for some of that folksiness that you're talking about.
Yeah, very interesting.
Kasai, you have some thoughtful comments and questions. Would you like to unmute and join the conversation?
Oh, I I am so nervous. I love this book so much. I fell in love with the characters. I missed it when I was done reading it. I made a little thing on my silly little Instagram page that a little, I don't know what you want to call it, but I just love this book so much, and I am reading it again. I'm wondering, was Unlikely Animals always the title? And if you had to choose a different title, what would it be?
Unlikely Animals is not always the title. So Rabbit Cake was always the title of Rabbit Cake. And I loved that title, and I still love that title. I love to say it. Unlikely Animals was not always the title, and it's still not like, and I like, it's a good title, but it's not because it does, like, I can talk about who's an unlikely animal in this town, and like, people are animals, and I knew I was going to play with coincidence and going to have a lot of fun with the miracle stuff that I felt like I had set up. I'd promised if she's a miracle healer, what's the miracle? So there was going to be unlikely events. But no, the original title, and I still love this title, but this is the problem with sharing your title before the book is done, is people will give you reactions to it. So the original title was The Creatures We Love the Most. And that title worked for me because of the we, and once it had the collective, the graveyard, and it's also something that Ernest Harold Baynes said about the fox. So the line is still in the book. It's he was the creature I love most in all the world. And so that was the title. That was a working title for a long time. But my dad is always wants to, he's very sweet and wants to just tell people about what I'm working on. And so he kept trying to tell people and be like, it's called something creatures, and I don't know, I forget. I'll just forget. And so he would always call me and be like, what's the book called again? I'm going to need to write it on my hand. And then it was just so many times that I was like, okay, fine, I will search for a 2-word title. So I drove myself crazy trying to find one. And so Unlikely Animals, in some ways, it's funny that I talk about, I don't usually tell the Barbara Kingsolver story. So it's funny that came out this time, where I, at least no one reads Unlikely Animals and isn't like, should have been more animals in that book with animals.
Right.
So yeah, well, thank you so much for liking the book so much and reading it again. That's
Yeah, and if anyone else has a question, you're welcome to unmute yourself or raise your hand.
And did you also ask about the Titanic play? That's you?
Oh yes, yeah,
Titanic
yes,
play.
I did.
So I guess I'll read it aloud because this is being recorded. So the Titanic play, I was laughing so hard and could see it all playing out in my head, hysterical. How was writing that scene? So that is a scene that I wrote. I don't usually do this. I try to write in order of how things are happening, because one of my mantras about being a writer, or one of the ways that I got stuck out of that like depression from first book to second book, and this is something I teach my novel students, is the Terry Pratchett quote, all you're doing is telling yourself the story, which is all I was doing with my first book, because I wasn't thinking about who was reading it except for me. And so then writing this book, I was writing all out of order because I was trying to build the world, which I think is a good part of the process. But then I needed to go through and like actually just sit and tell myself the story. But the Titanic scene I did write out of order because I knew I wanted, I worked for a musical theater company for a couple of years. And so I knew I wanted to use some of that like weird knowledge that I'm like nearly tone deaf. So there's not any other way that I can really use the knowledge that I had and so it just kind of, and I was always the Titanic play, and it was always, and so that just kind of, I knew I wanted all the characters to come together. So yeah, that scene just got more and more fun to write. So I wrote the basics of it. And then still one of my favorite things that happens was a final edit that Isabella Eklund kicks him when he talks to the ghost. And that came like very last minute, because I just wanted Isabella Eklund to have like a little moment to shine. And so that is like one of my last, I really wanted to do the John Irving, like everything comes together. And so, yeah, so I did write that early on and then kept adding to it. And yeah, it was as much fun to write as it is to read. That's a very fun writing experience, as is the banquet scene. Is one of my favorites. What my agent calls like set pieces, where everything kind of like collides and creates chaos, which is
yeah, I was going to say that's one of the charming things about the story. There are so many different, events, situations, and yet
it works. Yeah, yet it works. It's so seamless. It
does.
Yeah.
It's just priceless. It was absolutely hilarious. Thank you for that laugh. It was wonderful.
Yeah.
I see we have Elizabeth Schaefer. I believe you have some thoughts. Would you like to unmute, join the conversation? Elizabeth had a similar question as I did regarding your connection to Providence.
Yeah.
I was curious to learn more about your Providence connection, and if it influenced your writing of unlikely animals, for example, or anything related to that, I suppose.
Yeah, so I don't live in Providence now. My husband works at Brown still. So we lived in Providence for 5 years. And so the whole book was written in Providence. We moved to Providence in 2017. So yeah, Rabbit Cake came out while I was in Providence. And so Books on the Square and Riff Raff and Symposium were all super nice to me. We moved just 40 minutes outside. We live in Lakeville, Massachusetts, just because I wanted to get out into sort of the rural, someplace little rural. So, but we're still in Providence like almost every weekend. So you see me on the street. And I'm still very like Providence socially based, because I live in the middle of nowhere really. And so I wrote it on the east side. And I lived at the time and I'm forgetting the name of the cemetery, but the cemetery that's like right on Main Street. So I lived across from the gas station or the car wash. It's a big cemetery. It's not Swan Point.
Like on North Main?
North
Burial Ground.
Yeah. So it was just, that was, I did something that people aren't supposed to do, but I did walk my dog in that cemetery. And so I would take, I did write down cemetery names while I was walking. Like, so some, I probably nothing actually totally made it in terms of like the ghost names, because I didn't want to take them off the Newport graves, but I always like to write character names down from the cemetery, just to kind of play with names. And maybe some of them actually did end up, I wouldn't know exactly. Because I wouldn't remember, but that's, and it was funny to do my editorial calls, which is when you talk to editors and who want to buy the book. And I was just like looking at the cemetery and I was like, oh, these people are, and because I did live, so I just love cemeteries, because I was, when I lived, I went to my MFA at University of Alabama, and I moved down there right after the tornado that hit Alabama in 2011. And so there was like a lot of graduate student housing had been destroyed. So I moved into a house that hadn't been rented a long time, which was the groundskeeper's house in this cemetery. So even though people are like, don't walk your dog in cemeteries, I like lived in a cemetery with my big dog. And I just like feel like, why wouldn't you walk your dogs in cemeteries? It's like, as long as you pick up after them, it's just like the perfect place. But I am not a rule breaker, so I hate admitting this on a recording that but yeah, it's, and then I finished the book on the west side. We moved to a house that then is probably the reason we moved away, because we got rats in our car. And 2 gas leaks and 3 basement floods, and yeah, so but yeah, I edited the book there.
That's motivation.
Yeah, that was the last straw. So what's currently happened? So someone asked, what's currently happening with the Yellow Mansion? So the man who lived there, Bill Ruger, so this was like another coincidence that I think is in the author's note at the end, is that as I'm assembling my cast of characters, I had to have someone who could afford to live in the Yellow Mansion. So I was like, obviously the guy who owns the gun factory is the only person, which is, there's a gun factory in the town, is the only person who could afford to live in the Yellow Mansion. So I'm going to make this character. He was originally called Chicken Shit Ralph, and make this character and have him live in the mansion, own the gun factory. Then as I get like integrated in the town and get to meet people, I find out that the man who owns the gun factory does own the Yellow Mansion. Didn't want to get sued, so now he was just Ralph instead of Chicken Shit Ralph. There was like a whole backstory why he was called that, but I changed that. But other than that, he was not this man at all, and also would be hard to sue me because he's like probably the most like unproblematic, lovable character. And so that I was worried about that originally. And then the woman who was the president of the Historical Society said, Bill Ruger wants to meet you because he's heard about you writing this book, and you're writing about Ernest Harold Baynes. He is going home. He's stopping his cancer treatment, and he's going home, and he wants to meet you. So he had me to the mansion. Not actually, we didn't go into the mansion. He had me meet in one of his outbuildings, which was like a nice barn, but it was not like, I was like, couldn't we go have tea in like the mansion, you know? But I think he was really focused on me writing about Ernest Harold Baynes. That's what he was really interested in me writing about. So that's what he talked to me about. And he died like 6 weeks after we met. And so at that point, the mansion went up for auction, and he had 2 mansions. He also has one in Maine, and they had been totally restored to their former grandeur, and were just these incredible, like you can look on like Google Yellow Mansion, Newport, New Hampshire, or Bill Ruger Mansion, and you can see how nice they are, because it was auctioned off for $600,000. And so that is not the money that they were looking for. That is not the money that this place is definitely worth. So I don't know who lives there now, but
well, why don't we go over to Barbara Morin? would you like to unmute yourself?
Hey, hi Annie. I
Yeah.
took a lot of classes with you at one point, and
Oh yeah, hi.
yeah,
Renee.
Margaret did too. Um, anyway, I just want to say I love the book. I I loved Rabbit Cake, but I think I like this one even better. I just love the kind of complicatedness of it, and all the characters. I felt like that there were people in my own life, and it was just a delight to read, and it was sort of came at a good time when I needed distraction from pandemic stuff and everything. So it was just a total delight to read, and I just wanted to thank you for it. And I also wanted to say to Lee that I love your ears. So
Thanks. I'm trying to model after Sprite, Mr. and Mrs. Baynes's favorite fox.
Oh,
Thank you,
dear.
Barbara. It's so good to see you and hear from you. That's awesome.
Very nice. Very nice.
I think we have time for one more question. I see Deb. Deb has a question. Deb, would you like to unmute?
Sure. Very quick question. First of all, I want to thank you. I loved your book. And I was curious to know what you're working on now.
I am working on another. I mean, they're all dysfunctional family dramas, comedies, tragic comedies. So that is what I'm working on now. And it's set around here. It's set in, well, right now I'm calling the town Pondville. I live in Lakeville. I'm calling it Pondville. But I think that they're going to go on a road trip. So I'm like still in the middle of figuring out a lot of things. So it's not fully formed, but it's I think it's gonna eventually be as much fun as the other two. But
will it have animals?
yes. I was really worried about that.
That's great.
And when I started writing Unlikely, and it had, if you've read both the books, they both have a lot of animals. And I was worried about that because I had, Elvis is the character in Rabbit Cake, and she was obsessed with animals. And one way that I wrote that book was just by using this encyclopedia, Animals of the World. I would just open it and I would take some facts, and that's where I came across the naked mole rat. If you guys have read about the naked mole rat, they're fascinating animals. So I felt like can I do that again? Can I have this many animals? But it happened so accidentally. Like I probably would have had some animals, but if I hadn't discovered the park and Ernest Harold Baynes, and my agent at the time, I called her and I asked her that, and she was like, Annie, no, you're going to write many books and you are always going to have animals in them. And I think your readers will be disappointed if you don't. So she at least gave me that permission. And so that's what I've been working with. So
Nice.
And I did see that someone was going to use Unlikely Animals for a book discussion group coming up. They're going to recommend it.
You should
And
ask me to Zoom. I'm happy to Zoom.
And oh, nice. And I just wanted to remind folks that the last Monday in November, we are going to have at the Wanskuck Library, the Brown Bag Book Club, and we will be discussing your book. So again, the characters are so rich. There's so much to talk about. Really, I really, really enjoyed it as well. And
Yeah, and we had read it and for my book club a few months back, and it was a blast. Yeah, a lot to talk about.
Yeah, so if
and
anyone
it was
wants to come in,
fun to read and discuss.
I'm so glad.
But I think that it might be a wrap. I think we've come upon the hour. So I just want to thank you, Annie, for taking the time out of your day to spend some time with us. Not to mention Denise, thank you for co-hosting from Wanskuck Library this month.
oh, my
If you want
pleasure.
to join us again, thanks. Yeah, if you want to join us again next month, Amy and I will be co-hosting Communities Read Kurt Vonnegut with Alan of Smith Hill Library and a very special guest, Catherine Housley. if you want to learn more about that and register for that event, I put the registration link in the chat. You can click there and find out more and register. So hopefully we'll see you next month. So until then,
Let me
good
just
night. Good
throw
night.
in-
And thanks. Thank you everyone for showing up and attending and hanging
I
out.
was going to just throw in one more thing. I'm so sorry.
Oh, go
Such
for
a
it. Please,
nice
please do.
group.
Thanks.
Such a nice group. I don't want you to leave. Let's all go for tea. But during the month of December rather, we have special makerspace programs going on. So that'll be on Thursday evenings. We have an awesome room for makerspace. Garrett will be working with the folks, and what they're going to do is create Christmas wrapping paper, which is so cool. You'll be carving in
That is cool.
linoleum to create your own pattern. So there's so much going on at the library, and we do hope that you pop in, go over to the library website, and we hope to see you there. Okay, Annie, thank you so much. It was awesome evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I so appreciate it.
Thank
It was
you.
a pleasure.
Thank you. Good night, everybody. Bye.
Bye.